Welcome to 2023's April Speakeasy Salon, brought to you by American Insight. American Insight's mission is to promote the history and values of free speech, human rights, and the rule of law by discussing how these values emerge in contemporary societies around the world through the lens of independent filmmakers. My name is Fei Yuan. I'm a New York-based film producer, editor, and curator. A documentary I worked on called Jazz in China won American Insight's 2022 Free Speech Award. And I'm thrilled to be here today to co-moderate this month's Speakeasy with my co-moderator, Bluma Hammerhead. Bluma is a current freshman at Amherst College who is planning to study English and neuroscience. Bluma is passionate about free speech and women's rights around the world. And our special guest for this month's Speakeasy is Coralie Van Rietschoten. Coralie Van Rietschoten is a French documentary and animation director. Before that, she was an editor for more than 15 years. She directed Chinese Cancan, Lulu, a Chinese woman, Ni Hao, Han Time, Magma, First Chinese Tour, Pumpkin, and co-directed Pre-Menonance Nor Sur Nons Collins. Her current projects are No Filter Cafe and Digital Revolution is Not a Dinner Party. Coralie, like we just said, is the director of Chinese Cancan Lulu, which was a 2022 official selection winner at our annual Free Speech Festival. The film chronicles how burlesque dancer Lulu Galore expresses herself in an authoritarian regime like China. As the movie's description says, in China, like everywhere, a woman's place in society is linked to politics and tradition. But China's politics and tradition make a unique setting on Earth. It's within this context that Lulu emerges. Coralie, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much, Coralie. It's great to be here. I'm really excited to speak with you about the film. I really enjoyed it. And just to start, I'd love to hear how you got started in film and how you came to documentary filmmaking.
Well, actually, I first went to China to edit a movie. And basically, the filmmaker is a French guy, but lives in Shanghai. And he said, we could edit it in Paris, or maybe we could edit in Shanghai. And I said, yeah, let's go to Shanghai. I want to visit. And once there, I started to film with no purpose, but I noticed that in Chinese society, it's very okay if you film people in the street. And there's no such thing in France. Like if I start filming, everybody will start either doing yeah or just yelling at me or something like that. And there, nobody cared. And so you could film some real street views and everybody would act just normal. And this is something that I liked a lot. So I started to film in the streets, little things. And little by little, I started to think, hey, maybe I should do some documentaries. And this one, Chinese Cancan, is not the first one I started, but it's the first one I finished in a way. And I started to film burlesque in Paris first. I was interested in the whole contrast between something quite sexy and some feminists talking that was with it all the time. So I started to film that in Paris. And then since I was in China, I thought, is there some here? And I was surprised to find some and started filming that. And at some point, it was obvious that the Chinese characters were really stronger than the Parisian ones. So it became a portrait.
And for Lulu specifically, can you tell us about how you came across her and how your first interaction went?
Well, it's actually in the movie. It's in 2011. I started to film one night that she made all about herself. It's very. It was the first night I met her. It was in Lulu Galore's show, and I'm quite shy, so it was really interesting to me to film someone that's expressive and that's self-assured. And that's how we met. She was one of the only person doing burlesque in China, and especially Chinese. There was only her. So that's how I met her, like through internet. I Googled and I found, no, not Google, not in China, but anyway, I found her and and asked, hey, can I film? And she was really thrilled. And that's how we started. But then at this point, I had no idea it would last 10 years, that 10 years after I would still be filming her and visiting her in China.
Yeah. When you first met her, was there any specific quality of her or aspect of her story that you felt needed to be shared?
Yeah, I think I had a lot of cliches about Chinese people in general. Like here in France, we tend to view everything through freedom of speech or human rights point of view, which is very important, but is not always the first thing Chinese people think about every morning when they wake up, because they live there, and so they adjust to where they live in a way. And it's yeah, she's not a dissident, but she's not also a party PCC lover. With like, she's somewhere in between and doesn't really care about politics. So that was the first surprise. But she's not the only Chinese girl or person that I met that's like that. But I mean, that's an aspect of her that I liked. And what she did was really risque there. I knew that some girls went to jail just because they made some nudies. I knew that also the artist Ai Weiwei had a lot of problems with pornographic images. So he's just naked on the photo. So it's here it would be oh yeah, whatever. But there it's you can go to jail just for a photo like that. So yeah, what she did was really she dared a lot, and she could have had more problems than she actually had. And so I thought she was very courageous, but in a way not confrontational, but with a smile and just doing whatever she wanted, and trying to go through with it.
Yeah, thank you.
And Coralie, the film spans 10 years and over significant stages in Lulu's life. That's something that I really enjoyed while watching it, because also as a documentary filmmaker, I know a film takes as long as it needs to take. And in this case, you're following, she's a subject and also a collaborator. So can you tell us more about what it was like, the process of making this film? Were there any setbacks or unforeseen directions that the film took that was totally unexpected?
Yeah, I went to China, I think every year or so. I always asked for a tourist visa. I'm officially just a tourist in China. That's why I can film discreetly, and they never knew I was doing anything that had to do with filmmaking, and it's the only way to get in anyway. So yeah, I'm officially a tourist, and I did some tourism. I went to Yunnan and I saw some beautiful landscapes and things like that. So that made it more credible also. Mm-hmm. But in the process, each time I went there, I tried to see her and see, so it was maybe 1 year or 2 years later each time. And I tried to see also what's happening now. And I was a bit lucky because sometimes it was on purpose. Like she would say to me, oh, I think I'll leave Beijing, and so maybe I'll do a big show before that. So I was like, okay, when is it going to be? I try to be there. But sometimes I just randomly arrived and she would say, okay, now it's a big step. I got a divorce. Okay, things like that. So little by little, I started to add more and more aspects of her portrait and of her character. And but I didn't know how to end the movie. That was a big difficulty that I had, because I could do that for 20 years, but then what? And last time I was there, I had the surprise that she had stopped doing burlesque. So I was, okay, that's the end. So we didn't really plan, but since I went quite often, I think luck comes with sometimes being tenacious, and
And actually on that note, how did your relationship with Lulu change over this span of time? Because I find it very interesting as someone who, follows her so closely with a camera, and she's also kind of in the performing arts, and so she's kind of used to being kind of like the spectacle on stage. But I do think that having someone like her kind of open up to the camera is like a very different experience. And the fact that you had followed her for so long, very interested in how that relationship between you two evolved.
Yeah, I think at first she actually was a bit shy on camera, and didn't open so much. But I think, yeah, the fact that I showed her, like every time I would film something, I would show her, and she would say, "Okay, I think you." It was very important for her to look beautiful. That was one of the things that she was afraid of, like don't make me look big, or I don't know what. Because yeah, you know, it's her body and her appearance is part of the show. So yeah, that was very important to her. So once she was reassured, and she used some of the clips for her promotions also. So it was quite, yeah, it was an exchange. I gave her some images, and yeah, so each time she was happier to see me. And we're still very much in contact, and yeah, we became, I can say, friends, because we don't see each other so much, but yeah, I think we have a very good relationship now.
Yeah, and also it seems that, since you were going back to China so often, you said like once every 2 years. I'm also curious, just, outside of Lulu's life, you were a tourist visiting all these other places. In your view, how did China, like these different landscapes, these different environments, how did China change during this span of time?
I think it changed quite a lot. I first went there, as I said, in 2011, and Hu Jintao was in power then, and it was already authoritarian. Don't make me say that it was. So I first went to China in 2011, and Hu Jintao was in power then, and it was already an authoritarian regime. It was the same regime actually than since the 50s. But you could feel some openness, and it was never totally open, but yeah, some weird music was coming in, and some I did a documentary about a weird French band, prog rock band, touring in China, for example, and I don't know if today they could still tour. But yeah, between 2011 and 2015, you could feel the society really opening to many influences through Japan, through the US, through Europe. And yeah, it's very different now because of surveillance becoming stronger and stronger. And there's so many things that you can't discuss, can't do, can't say. And also, yeah, nudity is a problem. For music, it's lyrics can be a problem just for one word, or just for even the mood. Like if it's too dark, then it's forbidden, because our young people will commit suicide if they hear that. So no, that's not allowed. Things like that. So it's there's so much censorship that now it's getting harder and harder to get things inside there. But it's a big country, and there's always some things in the shadow happening.
And I think that's what makes your film interesting, because I feel like to see Lulu, grow up in a way as a performer in this environment and change with the tides of time makes, I think, her character even that much more interesting. And I want to talk about that a little bit with you, because, one observation I had about the film is that it seems that the role of women in urban contemporary China, especially in urban areas, is this kind of constant negotiation between the freedom to express oneself and then also adhering to rules and expectations. And I kind of saw that very clearly in Lulu's case. So while you were following Lulu all these years, was there ever one moment or instance that stood out to you that sort of encapsulates her entire lived experience of being a woman in China?
I think the moment when well, at first I was doing a documentary on burlesque. That was the start of it. And the moment when I realized it was more a documentary about women in China was when she had divorced and when she went really almost all the way naked on stage. And yeah, that's a moment where when I thought, okay, now she's really burning everything, every boundaries and doing what she wants. And I thought it was great to film this moment and and it was also great that I had filmed her before not doing that, not daring to do that. And yeah, so that's when, and it's a bit sad in a way that after that she didn't keep on, but I mean, it is what it is. When we were young, we dare to do things. And also in an environment like that, I think she's wise to stop at some point. She went very far, and I mean, I don't want her to end up in jail. So yeah, I think it's good that she stops at some point.
Right, right. And actually that brings me to my next question, because I do think that Lulu's story is in many ways unique to China because China is such a unique case. But at the same time, I feel many of the challenges she faces today are shared by women across cultures. And so I'm curious as to like which qualities of Lulu's experience do you think are universal?
Yeah, I think while I was filming, a lot of people here, feminist people, say, "Oh, I have more in common with a woman on the other side of the world than with a man here," and I always didn't agree with that at all. But there's something doing this film that I realized is that, yeah, there is something true in it. I wouldn't be that extreme, but there's something that we all share, and it has to do with biology. With yeah, at some point we have to ask ourselves, do I want a child in my life? It's things like that we all share. And we all have conflict between our professional life and personal life, and we all have rests of the old world that we still have to carry a little bit. So, but it's in China, I think it's more extreme. So in a way, it was very interesting to study it there and then transpose it to my society, and yeah, kind of compare. And because in some ways, sometimes they're more free on some things. Like I was amazed to see how Chinese girls in the street dress really sexy. And here, I think we're more moderate on that. So that was a surprise to me. I thought all Asians were quite shy and total cliche. Right. And yeah, I went there and it's kind of, oh yeah, okay, in the streets, maybe because of the uniform before. Once they're adults, they're like really sometimes very slutty. And it was a surprise to me, for example, and it was kind of liberating. Like I started to dress different after going there, things like that.
Interesting. Yeah. And actually, I'm curious too, has this film played in China at all?
I don't think so. Lulu has the film and she has a really just very different version. She didn't want the world fascist country to be in it. So I just, even though it's not her saying it, it was too strong of a word. But what is really interesting is that just before the guy says, burlesque cabaret is always in interesting environment like the Nazis, the Great Depression. So I like us doing this here now. So that's you can understand that he's saying it's a fascist country, but he didn't say it. So that was okay. But then she said, I don't want the word like really too clearly said. So yeah, so we just cut this word. So she has this version. And she can show it whenever she wants, but I don't know. I think she didn't have any occasion yet, and I think it's a bit risque too. So I guess she's showing it to her friends.
Right. Yeah. And also, one through line in the film that I found very interesting is Lulu's sort of opening up to her parents, because I got the sense that initially she was very wary or hesitant about them knowing, her curiosity about and her, growing interest in burlesque. And at the end, I still didn't get that she was 100% honest or transparent about it, but she did invite you to their home and you guys had a dinner together, which is a very Chinese way of showing love and affection and basically, you know, welcome, right? So I'm interested, you know, after this film came out, seems like Lulu has the film. Do you know if she's shown any parts of the film to her parents?
I don't think so. No, I think there's too much of a barrier between their generation and hers. And it's something that I can understand. I mean, China changed drastically every 5 years or 10 years. It changes a lot. And they have a hard time adjusting to the younger generation. And so no, I think she doesn't want to shock them, and it would shock them. So I think she didn't. But yeah, maybe she showed the part where she sings or things like that. But she must have edited a like 5 minutes version, maybe.
Yeah, it's really an interesting part of the film to me to see their
You
dynamic.
know, in some ways, I see some similarities there between the French and the Chinese. And years ago, and this might be a total stereotype, but years ago, I was talking to this French couple about kind of the perception of affairs, like extramarital affairs. And, you know, the US is this whole thing like, why didn't you tell me? That's always like the first thing people say. It's like, you want total honesty and transparency. And in France, this couple was telling me it's almost the opposite. It's like, you can have affairs as long as nobody knows about it. It's like rude to actually, you know, find out that everyone knew about this affair and not me kind of thing. So I totally get that whole, you have to, and it goes back to my earlier point about how I think Lulu always felt that she had to adhere to certain social expectations, specifically around the family structure, because these are the parents who, and she's probably an only child too, right? Like post 80. She's probably an only child.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, you know, paying respect to the parents who raised her, that's always going to be a priority to her. And she was not going to do anything to jeopardize that relationship. So some freedom, but within those constraints.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's funny what you said about the extramarital affairs. It's I guess quite true. I think there are many different cases in France, but yeah, I've heard some people saying that like, okay, I just don't want to know. Like, you can do whatever you want, just don't tell me, and I don't want all my friends to know before me and things like that. So, but yeah, of course it depends. And but yeah, I think there's always some kind of lie in the whole social process. You can't always be transparent with everyone, and especially not with your parents. And there maybe it's a bit more extreme because a lot of things can be seen as very pornographic. I mean, it's the law. The law says what she's doing is pornography. So if her parents see that, it's just like somebody here discovering that their child is doing porn films. It's quite a shock. I mean, parents can accept that maybe, but it's something like, you have to process. And so, yeah, I can totally understand why she didn't tell them.
Yeah. In fact, the first time I saw Lulu on stage performing, the first thought that went through my head, and I'm also from Shanghai and my parents live there. I was like, wow, that's so awesome that she's, you know, doing that as a feminist. I admire her. But also in the back of my head, there's like, I really hope her parents don't know about this. was my thought exactly. So when she said that on camera, I was like, I was rooting for her, you know. I hope that she's able to live out these different parts of herself freely, without causing suffering to her parents.
Yeah, exactly. I also, yeah, I totally understand that. And I'm also glad that she's not too violent with them because, I mean, yeah, family is important. And sometimes when you're young, you don't think and you just, you just shrug things out and think, okay, they have to accept me. But she didn't do that. And I think it's good for her life, personal life.
Yeah. I think on the one hand, it's a little sad that her parents don't know what she's doing with her life because it's really amazing. But I think part of their concern also comes concern for her safety, which is really understandable. Like, bad things could happen to someone who does what she does, despite how wonderful it is.
Yeah.
So I kind of sympathize with her parents and their and her choice not to share with them. Changing subjects a little, I'm wondering, you're saying that you were still in contact with her. How did the pandemic affect her life? Do you have any conversations with her about that?
Yeah, of course. Yes, well, at the end of the movie, you can see some clips of her doing coaching online. So she's done that quite a lot. And also, well, at first, the pandemic, because of the zero COVID policy, kind of working at the beginning, or at least that's what we heard, they left, there started to be concerts again and all the shows, and everything was starting to get normal again there, while we were still struggling. So for a while she was doing a lot of stuff actually, and while here we were still very present. But then it became the opposite with Omicron and COVID going up and up. It became harder and harder. And recently she just told me that because now zero COVID policy is not applied anymore. So recently she told me I had my first real big gig, feels so good. So yeah, she's back. But yeah, mostly singing. She does still, yeah, singing and playing with band. That's what she does now.
Okay.
Mostly.
Where does she sing? What sort of?
Sorry?
What sort of singing? Still jazz singing?
Yeah, jazz singing mostly, and yeah, pop singing, and also doing some gym coaching. And I actually took one of her classes. I should do it more often, but yeah, it's I did some. I have a coach in China. It's very chic.
Does she ever, do you think, miss the burlesque world? Have you ever talked about that?
I think she's still. There's not much left of the burlesque world right now in China because a lot of foreigners went away. She already said that in the movie in 2019, and it was just before the pandemic. And it was already a lot of tourists had their visa, not tourists, sorry, people working in China had their visa not renewed. And especially people like go-go dancers or anybody having some kind of work like that, the visa was just refused at some point. So there was less and less of this kind of things going on. And but still, once in a while, I see a photo of a show somewhere where people are doing burlesque and she's still hanging around with them, and maybe not doing the whole show on stage with them, but yeah, she still likes it.
Yeah. I want to return to something you said a little bit earlier about cliches that you had coming into making the film about China. And how did you feel that your idea of China changed over the course of making the film?
Yeah, it did change a lot. First time I went there, I almost didn't know anything. And it's kind of weird, the image we have here, because sometimes it's like this whole very traditional things with the wise man talking and the whole Chinese songs and I don't know, it's kung fu and things like that. I mean, we have a very weird vision of China, and then we have the whole high-tech thing that went on it, and it's just sort of mix-up that is hard to figure out from out of China. But going there, I realized that there's little bits of all of that there.
Well, in a way, you've already said it earlier. I just think that, Lulu, she as a woman evolving and growing as an artist in this environment sort of says it all, and it's very interesting to me how the film mirrored, like I said earlier, the stages of her adolescence. She was in her, I'm guessing in her 20s when you started, and now she's in her 30s, and she has other priorities now too, like family, relationships. She's thinking more long-term. And also, China has changed as we discussed.
Yeah. And China has changed while I was there, but it's true that before I went there, I didn't have a clear image of what China was, and I think it's normal because it's very, very big, and so it's really hard to figure out from the outside.
Yeah.
And there's an interesting question on the
Yeah,
So,
so I think the question is, where do you currently, how do you stay in touch with Lulu? Like, how do you find out about what's going on with her?
well, normally in China, people don't have the same internet softwares or tools than we have here. For example, they can't access Google, YouTube, almost anything we know, Facebook, etc. But she's part of the maybe 10% people who try to have a VPN, and it doesn't work all the time, but sometimes it does. So she's on Facebook, for example. She has a few of the tools that we use here, but mostly we are in contact on WeChat. I installed WeChat because I went to China a lot, and if you don't have WeChat, you can't really take anybody's contact because they all use WeChat. So yeah, I have WeChat, and that's how I contact her mostly. She posts more on WeChat than on Facebook. Facebook is just once in a while.
Right.
She posts her photos, whereas on WeChat it's almost daily.
Right.
And I mean, as we saw in the film, she seems like the kind of person who's very daring and willing to push the boundaries of what's accepted. Do you feel like she's still doing that, or has she, as she's developed, kind of stepped back from that part of herself?
No, I think she is probably in another way. Like maybe she's gonna sing in a place where it's not easy or something like that. She always has challenges, and that's how she. Yeah, I mean, I think she doesn't take no as an answer. So I think she's still doing that. But maybe she's a bit wiser in the sense that she's trying to make a living out of it. But I can totally relate to that. That's a problem I can have too in my life, because yeah, I didn't make any money doing this movie. I actually paid to produce it, and had to buy a camera at some point, things like that. But yeah, I can see she's a bit wiser maybe, but she's still daring. Yeah. And yeah, I think burlesque anyway, even for people doing it here, sometimes they keep on for all life long, but sometimes it's more of a phase, like they'll do that for 10 years and it will make them less shy, and then they'll do something else, and they use what they have learned from it, from teasing the audience and from daring, in whatever they do next. So I think she's doing that.
Just what you mentioned about being shy made me think of, I read a recent interview with you where you spoke about you yourself being a shy person, but obviously Lulu is not. And I'm wondering, did you, over the course of making the film, get courage from following this courageous, daring person?
Yeah. It's I still don't do burlesque. I still don't do that, but yeah, I think, but in general, going to China kind of, I mean, in France, before we do anything, we have to think about it a lot. And I did a cinema school that's called La Femis, and it's very intellectual. And I studied editing there. But I mean, before we start to do a project, we have to discuss it for a long time. And it's not really how I work. I like to film first and think next. And it didn't really work out well with this school. But yeah, I think here, for example, before I went to China, I had filmed a lot of concerts, but I never put them online because I was always not happy with the editing. It's not perfect yet, so I still have to do the color grading or something. And oh, is it good? Is it really good? Should I put it online? And then I went there, and then I met a lot of people who dared to do even things that were really not that good, they would just put them online. There's going to be another one next, so whatever. And that's really, yeah, I came back and posted a lot of videos and dared to do more things.
That's awesome. If you had to pick the most important thing that you learned from making the film, what would that be? Either in the realm of filmmaking and editing or on a more personal level.
Maybe that. I mean, she wouldn't say that she's not a feminist. Well, that's not what she would say, actually. I mean, but I think what I think personally is that feminism is very important everywhere. And it's any society has problems with women. And we have to really, just not just let go. And that's also something, when I was in my 20s, I would also say, I'm not a feminist, but now I don't say that. Now I say, I'm a feminist. Equal salaries, no violence. Yeah, I think I became a feminist doing this movie.
And just going off that, I'm wondering if you can speak more generally to what you think, what role does filmmaking play in the fight for women's rights and feminism and free speech?
It is very important for many reasons. First, it's one of the domains where we are still less women than men. There are more men doing films. The salaries are very not equal, and we still have. It's one of the places where we still have to win some space, I think. And also, it's a question of point of view, I guess. Even though I think a man can have a feminist point of view, it's okay. But we have to have a feminist point of view on things. It's important.
And in terms of the reception of your film, do you feel like, did it change anyone's perception, or do you think it made a difference to anyone? What did people say in response to it?
I've heard the main thing that I've heard is that some people say I've never seen a Chinese character like her, and I was really happy to hear that because I've seen some characters that kind of look like her a lot in China, but it's true that here we see either the Communist Party official films, and they have their perception of China, or we see very political films, and usually it's a blogger that ends up in jail, or a punk rocker and very extreme. But it's this kind of character. It's true. I hadn't seen a character like that in a movie here before either. So I'm happy when people say that. I don't know if it changed anyone's view on China, but I guess, I mean, there's a lot of ignorance also about China, and I'm part of it. I mean, I was really ignorant about it. I didn't know who Jintao was before I went there. Like, I had no clue about China before I went there. And I think I was happy to do a film about this girl doing burlesque, but then add some infos in it, because I think people learn about China while watching it a little bit. And I was happy to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely feel like I learned a lot from your film. And just as we're nearing the end here, I'm wondering if you could speak to the future for you. What's next for you after this project, and maybe also how do you feel like this project has changed what you see as future filmmaker projects?
Currently I'm working on another movie that I filmed in China, mostly, and it's about the digital world in China. It's called Digital Revolution is Not a Dinner Party, and I'm still in post-production of this movie, and of course the fact that I first finished the one before, and then I get a lot from showing it, and I think I can add more things about China in the next movie than it's good to there's a kind of continuity between those two movies, and it's a bit more political this time. Of course.
I would just love to hear you talk a little bit about specifically free speech. To finish off our conversation, could you speak to what free speech means to you, but also how your thoughts about free speech have been informed by the process of making this film and your experience in China?
Mm-hmm. I live in France, and here free speech is part of the whole human rights declaration, and it's supposed to be very important. But sometimes also we have laws that, of course, like everywhere, laws can forbid to say some things. And I've always thought it was very interesting to understand the boundaries of free speech. And traveling, well, I first traveled to the US actually 20 years ago, and this already started to confront me to a different view on free speech, because it's different in the US. Of course, there's this whole First Amendment thing, very important, and maybe extreme right has sometimes more free speech in the US than here, but here it doesn't mean that it's not present at all. Like, it's very, very present also. So it's interesting to see how sometimes it's just not just a question of free speech, like not just the fact that I can say whatever and then, oh, everybody's going to be seduced by what they say. It's a bit more tricky, I think. So yeah, that was already very interesting. And then going to China, of course, added another level of, because I think China, in a sense, shows us that it doesn't work when you censor everything. Taking everybody for children and saying, oh, everybody has to be for the whole family, and you can say a lot of things, and I think it's not very efficient to make a society responsible and thoughtful and care about each other and things like that. So yeah, basically that's what it revealed to me when I went there. I thought, okay, I think we need more free speech than there is in China. That's clear. And I don't know if it's enough free speech in France right now, but I'm sure there are some problems with free speech in France.
I'm curious too. I mean, you talked about free speech in France. What do you think, about free speech in America, if you follow the news here?
Well, I think there's a difference between free speech and free speech with a microphone, like with a megaphone, like for example, owning a network and being able to say something very often and very loud to a lot of audience. And I think in the US, maybe it's the same here actually. Some channels are very become more and more popular and maybe go further and further from normalness. I don't know how to say that, but we tend not to have a common ground anymore. And I think I noticed that first in the US when I went there, but it's here now, it's also very present. And I really don't think we should forbid some things to be said, but I think we should reflect on what do we have in common, and maybe not say there's only one truth, but say, okay, let's discuss about this and try to find out what is a fact and how do we describe it, how do we scientifically demonstrate a fact and learn about that. Like in schools, there's no course about facts, for example, and I think there should be. And I'm more and more going in schools as an editor and filmmaker to analyze videos. And I always tend to say, look at any video, be it on TV, online, from an official media or from this guy who filmed with his phone. Just look at it with a critical view. have doubts, but then analyze how it's done, and maybe if you know the tricks, you'll be able to move on in a better way.
Yeah, one thing I think it's interesting about the education system in societies that value free speech is that there's always this notion, at least taught to me in schools, to question everything. That's certainly, I went to 2 years in schools in China, although this was the early 90s, so things can be different now. But I just think that it's just not the essence of it is just to be skeptical, to have doubts. It's okay to not know and to change your mind and to question everything, really. And what you were saying earlier about how it's becoming more polarized here in the US, I think we feel that every day very palpably. But I'm interested in your perspective as well as sort of a observer, an outside of a European observer. What common ground, you were saying earlier about how we've lost common ground. In your eyes, what does that look like? What kind of common ground have we lost?
Well, for example, I think that the Earth is not flat. That's a basis. But nowadays, even in France, some people think that it may be flat, and it's really literally our ground that is questioned. And but I think it's interesting that people start asking questions about what we're told. That's a very, very interesting part of it. And I think people should be critical and should not take everything as granted. But at some point, maybe everything is not a lie, because else you're just reversing the process and believing everything else and not everything that comes from the media. And that's stupid also. There's a kind of balance to find. And I think the most important part is to have different sources, but sometimes it's hard because you think you have different sources, but it's just a bubble. Like this guy is quoting this guy, who is quoting this guy, and you're just turning around the same circle. But I read sometimes journals from a very different point of views from mine, and I really enjoy doing that because there's always something that's going to be said differently from what I'm used to, and good, just at least to know. And to know what they say, and to analyze differently. It's enlightening. And also, I think it's good to have very different point of view from yours. And also, for example, in my Facebook account, I did everyone that wanted to. So it's a very mixed up, like everybody who saw my movies and said that one, okay, let's be my friend. And I don't post anything political, so it's very diverse because Facebook doesn't really know what I think, and I like that because I see some parts of like even complotists, or I see a lot of different things on my Facebook account. I think that's interesting. It's a window on the world, and so I like not to be too much in a bubble, even though I think I'm right. I like to hear that I'm not.
Right. And also so that you're not just an algorithm, right? I feel like when you start posting the same things or have the same view, it feels algorithmic.
Yeah, I don't want to be in a redundant world where everybody thinks like me. It's good to have different, And also I go to a lot of concert shows. And it's just very random people thinking very different things. And music is a good, for free speech, music is a good thing because, for example, I listen to a lot of metal music, and a lot of metal bands have a lot of problems with free speech because some may reflect some extreme views, but some also, like one of my favorite bands is Slayer, and in the US they always had problems like covers forbidden and things like that. And they're not a fascist group. It's just that they use they talk about history. And I've always been interested in free speech through music also.
Yeah, I'm actually very excited about your next film. Digital Revolution is Not a Dinner Party. Yeah. I mean, what a great title.
It's an awesome title.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what a
it's
great
from
title.
Mao.
Yeah,
just
I know. I know the reference. Yeah, but also I'm very interested in that digital media culture
yeah,
because China it's like its own behemoth, in its own world. It's its own internet world, and I feel it very palpably when I'm there. Like everything happens on WeChat, and so Instagram or doesn't matter to them really.
no,
So
no,
they're
no.
literally creating their own bubble, if you will. The great firewall is real.
Yeah, and it's even not. I first thought that when I would go there, people would be like, "Boo! I don't have Google." Boo! No, they don't care at all.
Yeah, they created their
They
own.
when I say I use Google, they're like, "Why?"
Yeah,
It's not that good, and because it's been slowed down at the beginning when it was not
yeah,
forbidden yet, so they thought it was quite slow, and it wasn't that good with Chinese language also. Like if you wrote in Chinese and you were looking for information about Chinese culture, it was way less good than the Chinese version also.
right.
So in a way they lost the market before they were forbidden. And it's the same with Facebook. It's not that good compared to WeChat. Actually, WeChat is pretty amazing in a sense.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's it's Mark Zuckerberg's dream, and
right.
now he's trying to catch up with it. But yeah, it's quite amazing, and also because they pay with it for almost everything, either with WePay, or that is WeChat, or Alipay, that is Alibaba.
Mhm.
The whole real life world also becomes digital, and they can gather an amount of data that is really crazy because you pay your medicines with it, your medical appointments, everything. So yeah, it's both very scary and probably close to our
Convenient.
future and convenient. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting at least to watch what's happening there. 'Cause we're probably heading quite the same way, but it's going to take a few more years, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting trade-off in a way, convenience versus freedom.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, Coralie, I'm wondering if you have any questions for us. I know it's been a while
Um,
already, and I want to check in.
was your film shown in China?
It's not, but I'm trying to help the director find some screening opportunities there.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think the difference is, burlesque being an art form and jazz, they're, very active and vibrant jazz venues in China. I think that would be interested in showing the film to maybe not all in its entirety, but some parts of it, definitely. It's actually very pro-China, and not the pro-regime, but just the art, how artists have, managed to innovate and survive in this environment and really made contribution to jazz. Like in that sense, I think it has an audience in China,
Mm.
and not many Chinese people know about this 100-year long history of jazz in China. They know kind of the recent history because they go to the jazz clubs and they hang out, but they don't know how far back it really goes. So there's, I think, great historical value in that as well.
Mhm. Yeah, my previous film was shown in China, but just once in a very small venue, and it wasn't official at all. So, yeah, this way you can sometimes show your film, but maybe
Yeah.
it wasn't. It was about a band also, and we had cut a few parts also. We had cut the parts about censorship actually, so it was quite
Yeah,
interesting to cut the part
very
about
meta.
censorship mentions. No, no censorship.
Yeah. 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 And I think that's like an internal calculus too. I think as filmmakers, you're always negotiating between, what is your like tolerance for this kind of censorship, because on the other side of it, there is all this new audience that your film can potentially reach. So,
Exactly.
what kind of a trade-off do you make there as well? Like, of course, I would love to for your film and my film to be seen in its entirety, but if there needs to be parts that are censored, like which parts are we willing to negotiate on,
Mm-mm. And I've made also a very small teaser
Mm.
just for China. It's you can't even guess what she's doing. It's just about her, like, oh, I'm doing a show. It's a very abstract thing, like.
Yeah, interesting. I just want to quickly wrap up. Coralie, do you have any more questions for us before I do
No,
that?
it's okay. Thanks
Okay.
a lot.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, us talking about winning this Free Speech Award is a perfect opportunity to talk about this year's Free Speech Award, which will take place on Wednesday, November 15th, and it will be held at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And we will be in touch with you very soon about our upcoming speakeasies. Thank you so much for joining us.